that's the only thing that can be helpful, you should keep looking and keep trying to find something until you find something that clicks for you.
People are a good way to kind of like get you out of your own head with anxiety.
It's a little story about my friend who was in the car and we're in traffic, and he just started feeling anxious, and he just started getting that feeling. I was like, I know exactly how you feel. How can you feel better now? Like, would this help? Would this help? Would this help? And he said, oh, that would actually help, you know? So one of the things that happened to him, we pulled over and he got out and started walking. And that was one of the things that I had mentioned that. And he didn't think about that because he was just feeling anxious, you know? So knowing those feelings, I listed a few things that could probably help. And he just picked one, and that actually did help. So that was good that I was there.
Because before I told someone that I was having a hard time, and they were like, oh, I was having a hard time, and I never told anyone that either. And so you could be helping someone else by being the one who talked to them in the first place, you know? So you're not only helping yourself, but other people around you.
Like, even just this conversation that we're having right now is encouraging to me, because I would not have been able to say those things like 2 years ago. And now being able to like verbalize and articulate, you know, certain things that make me anxious, like different things that I can do, we can really figure out what we need to work on and how strong we are. Like, you're stronger than you realize. And just one day at a time, one step at a time.
Alright guys, so we are concluding the actual spoken series on anxiety. And I think I told you from the very first message that we gave in this series, I was kind of anxious writing it because I didn't have a whole lot of experience with anxiety. I didn't have a lot of personal experience with it. And to the point where I'm sure many of you have experienced more anxiety than I have. And so I didn't feel like I had the ability to really speak into it that much. But after the last 3 weeks, I really feel like something good has come out of this. I feel like the last 3 weeks we've had transformation happen in some students' lives. I feel like people are taking next steps to counseling. I feel like people are taking next steps and even admitting that anxiety is a part of their life. And today I'm excited because we get to close out the sermon series, but we're not ending the discussion about anxiety, because anxiety is going to be in your life, it's going to be in my life long after the sermon series is over. But today I want to talk about another situation that the disciples were in the book of Mark. So I'm getting a little bit of feedback. You guys just bring me a handheld in just a second. Thank you. Sorry, it's going to get real loud here in a second if they don't hand me a handheld. So. It is on. All right, perfect. So, as I was saying, we're going to talk about the disciples again. If you remember, we talked about the disciples multiple times throughout this series. We talked about how some of them were going through on the lake, and how when the winds picked up and the water got rough, their anxiety rose with the water, with the waves. And today we're going to be talking about a similar situation where odds are they would have been stressed out. They would have been anxious. So what we find here in Mark, and you can find the story in Mark chapter 6, verse 30. I'm going to do my best just to tell you the story because I don't feel like reading you off 14 different verses, so I'm just going to tell you what the story says. So what it says is you have Jesus and the apostles. All the apostles are there together, and they're like, you know what, it's late in the day, we're going to go travel somewhere else away from the crowd of people. So they wanted to get away from the crowd and just get to a secluded place. So they got in a boat and they left. There's something about boats with these guys. These guys were on boats a lot. But as they left, the crowd of people saw them leave. And the crowd of people wanted to follow them. They wanted to go ahead. And so, based on the direction they were going, they assumed they were going to a secluded place. And so the disciples actually get to the place they were trying to go to get away from people. And guess what? There's a whole crowd of people there. And so it's already late in the day. get away from the group of people, but now there's a group of people all around them still. There's no seclusion. They weren't getting away from anybody. On top of that, they hadn't eaten all day. They were hungry. So they hadn't eaten, they had traveled, and now there's a whole bunch of people around the place where they thought they were going to get some alone time. And it's interesting because they get to this place, and right away, Jesus says, all right, go ahead and sit down. And the whole crowd, they sit down, and they take a break. So they're still getting a little bit of break time, but the disciples can tell, hey, these people just followed on land where we were going by sea, and they're getting kind of hungry. And like, Jesus, should we tell them to go back to the town and go grab some food, and maybe they'll come back? Because we traveled a long way, so they may not come back, though. So we probably don't want to tell them to leave, but we don't have any food. And they need to be fed. Jesus replied to them, and he said simply, you give them something to eat. The disciples were confused. They said, should we go off and spend 8 months' worth of wages to go and buy these people food and come back? Like, we can't afford that. That's way too much money. We can't buy all of these people food. And ultimately, Jesus tells them, bring me everything that we have. And they had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And he took those 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish, and he told his disciples, feed them. And they were able to feed over 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Now I'll tell you, if I'm really hungry, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish may not be enough for me by myself. And to feed 5,000 people with that amount of food is physically impossible. The disciples didn't even know what was going on. They had these baskets of food, and the food just kept having more. And it got to the point where they even had leftovers. After they gave food to everybody, they had leftovers. And they were confused. They were happy, they were fed, but they were confused. And in last week's session, Stephanie talked about how Jesus healed 2 people. And you might remember that these 2 people he healed, there was a large group of people around him, and one person just touched him, right? And he was like, who touched me? Out of a large group of people, huge group, lots of people around him, he felt one person touch him. Now, odds are in that moment there were a lot of people touching him. But he felt one person touch him. And he could tell that person needed healing. And he got the crowd to come stop him. The disciples were like, no, come on, we need to keep going. Why? Who cares who touched you? There's lots of people here. But Jesus stopped, and Stephanie even said it during her message, sometimes we need to learn how to stop in our tracks and listen. And Jesus stopped where he was, stopped in his tracks, and he listened, and he healed somebody, and then he went on to heal a girl who had already been dead. And something that is different about this crowd than that crowd is they knew how to stop already. Because they were already there at the place where Jesus was going. And so when Jesus said stop, they stopped. Because they knew when Jesus stopped, something cool happens. They knew when Jesus took a break, that's when he started teaching. They knew that when he stopped, they were going to be able to maybe experience something they've never experienced before. So we often refer to the story as Jesus feeds the 5,000. Some people may say Jesus feeds 10,000. Oftentimes when they say 5,000, it's because they say 5,000 men. Because that's who would have mattered to them at the time when it was written. It was 5,000 men. Odds are there's over 10,000 people who were actually there that he fed 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish to and still had leftovers. Over 10,000 people. But if we take a closer look at the story, Jesus isn't even the one that feeds them. Jesus sits there, while the disciples are actually the ones who feed the people. But I want you to think for a second. The disciples had just sailed, so they just traveled, they hadn't eaten all day, and now there are 10,000 people people around them. How many of you, when you get hungry or you get tired, or if you're hungry and tired, your little brother or little sister are too much for you and you're already anxious or stressed out? How many of you is that the case where somebody who's younger than you, whether it's, or maybe even a friend, like they're just too much, they're just one person. Could you imagine 10,000 people around you wanting your attention while you are hungry and tired? These guys there's no way they weren't feeling anxiety in this moment. They hadn't eaten all day. They hadn't slept since the night before. There are 10,000 people who want their attention. They're like, we left to go get away from you people because we need a break. And now you guys are right here in front of me. So I want you to guess, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed out or how anxious do you believe the disciples were? But after you answer that, I want you, if you were in their situation, how stressed or anxious would you be? Talk to your neighbor real quick. How stressed out do you think they were? And how stressed would you be in that situation? Go ahead. Alright, so who in that situation is above a 5? Who would be above a 5 in that situation? Anybody? Alright, 6, 7, 8. We got anybody be a 10? Would just be straight, just like, I would be so anxious in that situation. Yeah, I bet you there's more of you guys, if I'm being honest. When I get hungry, and if I'm hungry and tired, I'm pretty much the worst person to be around. You can ask my wife. It is not a good combination for me. I just want to get away by myself, eat my own food, not talk to anybody. And I'd be right up there with a 9 or 10 with my stress or anxiety level. If I was hungry, tired, and I showed up, and a bunch of people wanted my attention, I'd be right up there with you. So, in that moment, do you think Jesus knew that his disciples were anxious and stressed out? Yeah? You think so? Because I don't know about you, but when somebody else is really anxious or really stressed, if they're at that 9 or 10 level, normally you can tell by their face, right? You can just tell, I'm not going to go mess with that person, right? Pretty often it's just like, yeah, I'm not even going to deal with that. I can tell right now that they are stressed out and anxious. You think Jesus knew that? You think Jesus could look over at Peter and be like, oh, that guy's stressed out? How about one of the names is Bartholomew? You think you can look at Bartholomew and be like, yeah, that guy's stressed out right now? I bet you he could. Not only that, he's Jesus. He knows what they're feeling. He knew that they were stressed out and they were anxious. So, why couldn't Jesus feed the people himself? Huh? Why couldn't Jesus do it himself? He's Jesus. He literally could have just fed everybody and everybody would have been good. That's not right, huh? So I really know that. He's Jesus. He could have fed everybody himself. Instead, he used his stressed out and his anxious disciples. And I think there's this thought that when I'm stressed out and when I'm anxious, Jesus can't use me. And as I've thought about that more and more today, going over this message, I've kind of decided I'm just going to go. I'm going fully off notes now. I'm just going to be done with this. Because I think there's something that you guys need to hear as students who are a part of the Elkhorn School District, or even if you go to Burke, or if you're homeschooled, whatever it might be, I feel like there's this thought that no matter what, I have to perform well, right? I have to get A's. I have to be on the varsity team. I have to be nearly you are doing too much, when you are expecting so much from yourself, so much more than what one person should expect from themselves, that's when anxiety starts to creep in. That's when it starts telling you that you're not good enough. You're not good enough for 4.0. You're not good enough to be on that team. You're not good enough to be in that musical. When you expect so much from yourself and you expect to perform in every single thing you do, anxiety starts to take control. Guys, if there's one thing that every single one of you who are in this room remember, one thing that you guys would take away from this series, it would be this. Jesus does not expect perfection. The expectation of Jesus is not perfection. Do you know why? Because Jesus was already perfect. He doesn't need perfection from you. He doesn't. You can look at all 12 of the disciples of Jesus, the people that Jesus went and handpicked to follow him. None of them were perfect. In fact, not a single one of them were somebody that you would think, that's somebody who should follow Jesus. That's somebody who Jesus should spend time with. Because most of them were fishermen. And believe it or not, fishermen were not the brightest guys in the world back in the first century. They were not the people that were spending time in their Bibles. They were not the people who were studying up on Hebrew Scripture and reading what we call the Old Testament now and gaining all that knowledge about God. They were the guys that were catching food that way those people could eat. These were not perfect people. These were people that had been written off, and they were going to be fishermen until the day that they died. But Jesus chose them anyways. And I think in our world, in our lives, we expect perfection from ourselves. We expect this greatness. We expect a 4.0. We expect to be on that team. We expect to be involved in that. And at some point, it's just too much. And so many of us end up anxious. So many of us end up feeling so much. We feel so much pressure. And you're putting it on yourself. Now, I know you might be saying, my parents expect that from me. Or I know you're thinking, my coach expects that from me. But ultimately, you are making the choice to have those expectations on yourself. I'm not telling you it's not good to have good grades. I'm not telling you it's not good to play on the varsity team. I'm not telling you it's not good to set goals to have good grades and play on that team and be a part of that. But if it is absolutely consuming your life that the second you get a B, you're anxious. The second you strike out, you're anxious. The second that you miss a note while you're singing, you feel the anxiety creeping in. You're expecting too much from yourself, and I want you to know that that isn't what Jesus expects from you. All he wants, and it's what the disciples do. If you read the New Testament, you can see every single one of the disciples at some point, they did this one thing. They shut up and they listened. They shut up and they listened for Jesus. It's a crazy thing to think about that maybe, just in a moment, being quiet and looking for the guidance of Jesus on your life might be the best thing for you. It's crazy to think to stop for just 1 minute, to stop thinking about school, to stop thinking about sports, to stop thinking about music, or to stop thinking about having to go to that club or having to go to that group, and just thinking, Jesus, what do you have for me, would be the thing that helps you the very most. Because Jesus doesn't need you to be perfect. Jesus is not here to give you anxiety. All you need to do is shut up sometimes and listen. And sometimes I just need to listen for Jesus. So by going off my notes, I may have totally ruined the small group questions. I may have totally ruined anything that your small group leaders may have planned already to talk about. In which case, small group leaders, I apologize if I did that. But guys, there is this idea of Jesus not expecting perfection, while you expect perfection from yourself. This is the one thing I want you to take away from this week, from this series. This is the one thing I want you to take. Because we live in a society that's full of performance, that wants to squeeze every ounce of performance that you have out of you, and then expects you to not feel anxious about it. That's ridiculous. They're squeezing everything you have, everything out of you. You're going to feel anxious about that. That's not why Jesus is here. So sometimes, like I said, we just need to shut up and listen for Jesus. So as we get ready to break up our small groups, guys, I want to know, your small group leaders want to know, what is causing this anxiety in your life? What is stressing you out in your life? What is causing so much noise in your life that you can't even hear Jesus? What is in your life right now that is causing you your anxiety? And leaders, this might be a time for you too. This could be a time for leaders as well to talk about things that are going on in their lives. Because I know these leaders, I know myself, I know there are things that I feel anxious about. I know there are things that they feel anxious about too. So my encouragement to you is talk about it. Where do you feel like performance and perfection are needed? And what would it look like if you didn't expect that from yourself? Would you guys pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for today. I thank you for this opportunity to talk about perfection. And the fact that there's not a need for perfection. You never asked us to be perfect. Instead, you asked us to turn to you. Your only expectation is that we would be willing to listen. I thank you that we get the opportunity today to take a minute to shut up and listen for you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, you guys can go up and go ahead and get up, go to your small group. If you don't know where to go, come on up and I can tell you where you need to be.
Yeah, and I knew that if I got going, that it would really feed back. So.